6:47 a.m. Shift starts in 13 minutes. The supervisor who's supposed to run the floor calls in sick. No warning, no backup plan already in motion, just a phone call 13 minutes before start. The assistant supervisor finds out the same way everyone else does. Standing in the break room, phone in hand, 3 people already looking at him, waiting to hear what needs to happen next. He says nothing, not because he doesn't care, but because he has no idea what to say or do first. 2 departments over, a different assistant supervisor gets the exact same call. Same warning, same 13 minutes of warning. But she's already talking. Who's covering what? Who needs to know what happens in the next 5 minutes? Not guessing, not stalling, already moving. Same plan, same call, same amount of warning. But one of them was ready for the morning long before it started. So here's the question I want you to sit with. What made the difference? Welcome back to the Frontline Leadership Podcast, where we help organizations strengthen and empower the leaders their operations depend on. I'm your host, Craig Coyle, former Apache helicopter pilot, aerospace leader, and founder of Operation Lead. I want to ask you a different question than the one most leadership content asks. Most of it asks, are you ready for a crisis? It's an important question, one every single leader needs to wrestle with. But it isn't the only question. You're not the only one standing on the floor at 6:47 in the morning. Your supervisors are too. So the real question is, are they ready? Or more importantly, did you build that readiness into them? Or are you hoping they just figure it out when it matters? Most organizations never answer that question on purpose because they never think to ask it. They never define what a leadership crisis is, so they rarely have leaders who are prepared for that. They unknowingly fall victim to treating crisis response like a personality trait. Some people are just calm under pressure. Some people just have it. And if a supervisor doesn't have it, well, on to the next. I want to spend this episode taking that apart because it's not true. And believing it's true is costing you more than you think. January 15th, 2009, U.S. Airways Flight 1549 takes off from LaGuardia. About a minute into the flight, it strikes a flock of Canadian geese. Both engines flame out completely. No power, zero thrust. Chelsea Sullenberger and Jeffrey Skiles are now flying a 70-ton glider over one of the most densely populated cities in the world with 153 other souls on board. I want you to pause for a second and picture that cockpit. What do you imagine it looking like, feeling like, sounding like in those crucible moments? How do you picture the pilots reacting? What would you do if you were in their place? Less than 4 minutes after the bird strikes, that plane was safely floating on the Hudson River. All 155 people on board survived. You probably know this story. It's commonly referred to as the miracle on the Hudson, and it's been turned into headlines, books, and even a movie with Tom Hanks. But here's what the word miracle gets wrong. It wasn't a miracle. A miracle is something that happens to you. What happened in that cockpit is something that happened because of thousands of hours that came before it. Sullenberger didn't discover in that moment that he was calm under pressure. He'd been rehearsing that exact kind of decision-making for decades. In simulators, in training, in checklists run so many times, they stopped being something he had to think about and became something he just did. I can tell you this firsthand because I lived a version of it. When you go through military flight training, and this is true whether you're flying an Apache or anything else with an engine and a crew depending on you, an enormous percentage of your training has nothing to do with the parts of flying that go right. It's all about what happens when something goes wrong. You sit in the simulator and instructors fail your engines, your systems, your instruments on purpose over and over until your response to a specific kind of emergency isn't a decision you're making in real time anymore. It's already been made. You're just executing it. That's not natural giftedness. It's not a personality trait. That's habit-forming infrastructure built deliberately, drilled repeatedly, long before the day that it's actually needed. And here's the thing that took me a while to see clearly. The version of me who could stay level-headed when something went wrong wasn't the naturally calm version of me. There isn't a naturally calm version of me. I get nervous. I get adrenaline spikes, just like anyone else. What training gave me was a rehearsed next step to move toward instead of a blank space to freeze it. That's the difference between the two supervisors we opened this episode with. It was never about who's naturally wired for chaos and who isn't. It's about who had the next step built into them and who didn't. So let's bring this back to your organization, because here's where I want to challenge you directly. Think about how your organization actually develops supervisors. Communication training, maybe. Technical skill, absolutely. Some organizations even get to delegation or time management or how to run a meeting. But I want you to ask this honestly. Where in that development do we address when things don't go as planned? When something breaks, when a shift lead quits without warning, or when quality breaks down? For most organizations, the honest answer is nowhere. And it's not that leaders decided this doesn't matter. It's just that it never got named as something you build on purpose. It got left in the same bucket as personality and talent. Something a person either has or doesn't, discovered only in the moment it's tested. Usually at the worst possible time, in front of the entire team, when the stakes really matter. And this isn't a knock on your supervisors. The frontline supervisor who freezes or drops the ball in a critical moment isn't failing because they're weak or unprepared as a person. They're failing because nobody ever installed the infrastructure both Sully and I had as professional aviators. Nobody ran them through the simulator failures. Nobody identified the emergency, laid out the action plan, and rehearsed the process with them. The absence of that system is the actual villain here, not the person standing in the middle of the floor with no idea what to do in a completely foreign situation to them. And here's what that absence actually costs. And I want to name this plainly, not as a scare tactic, but as a description of what's actually already happening in plants like yours. When supervisors freeze or improvise badly under real pressure, it doesn't just cost you the minutes on that particular morning. It costs you trust. The team watches how their leader responds to chaos, and that response either builds their confidence in that person or quietly erodes it. It costs you production and operations where a bad improvised call under pressure has real consequences. And it costs you your own time, because unprepared supervisors escalate. Problems that should have stayed 3 layers below you land back on your desk, and you become the bottleneck, solving things that should have never made it that far up the chain. That's not hypothetical. That's what happens every time crisis readiness isn't baked into the foundational development and empowerment of your frontline leaders. So if crisis readiness isn't a trait, then what is it? Well, I think it's 4 steps, and this comes straight from what we call emergency actions in the leader's pre-flight checklist. And I want to walk you through it using the floor scene from the top of this episode, because the difference between those 2 supervisors comes down to exactly these 4 things. Step 1 is identify the emergency situations your team may actually face. Not hypothetical disasters, the real specific, predictable enough situations your operation runs into. A key operator calling in sick at the worst possible moment. A quality issue surfacing mid-shift. An equipment failure. A team member confronting another one in front of the group. If you've been running this operation for any length of time, you already know what these look like. You've just never sat down and named them on purpose. Step 2 is to identify how to recognize each one early. This is the piece almost everyone skips. A supervisor who's been trained to recognize a quality flag the moment it appears responds completely differently than the one who's blindsided by it 2 hours later once it's already compounded. Recognition isn't automatic. It's taught. Then step 3, we create an executable action plan for each one. Not a vague, stay calm and figure it out, a specific, concrete sequence. Who do you notify first? What's the immediate stopgap? What decision is yours to make on the spot, and what has to be escalated? This is exactly what a simulator failure trains into a pilot, not composure, sequenced action steps. And step 4 is to distribute and communicate that plan before it's ever needed. This is the step that separates a system from a good idea you had once. The plan does nothing sitting in your head or in a document that nobody's read. Your supervisors need to know the plan exists, know their role in it, and have walked through it, ideally more than once before the morning it actually matters. So let's go back to that supervisor at 6:47 a.m., the one who was already moving instead of frozen. She wasn't improvising in that moment. She was executing something that had already been decided. Somebody, maybe it was her, maybe her leadership, had already gone through these 4 steps for exactly this kind of morning. That's not talent. It's proactive leadership. That's preparation somebody built on purpose before it was needed. And that's the shift today is meant to help you make. Stop asking whether your supervisors have what it takes. Crises aren't an if, they're a when. And building the readiness for that when is your job, not theirs to discover alone. Rather, start asking whether these leaders have a next step instead of a blank space. It's not their job to figure out alone. It's your job to guide them, develop them, and empower them. This is exactly why emergency actions is one of the 5 pieces of the leader's pre-flight checklist. It's not there so you personally have a plan for your own bad mornings, though it can certainly be used like that. It's there as a starting framework for what you build into every supervisor on your team. So the next crisis, no matter how big or small, gets met with a rehearsed next step instead of a blank stare. Download it for free at operationlead.com/checklist and start naming the emergency situations your supervisors are most likely to face. And look, if you're thinking about what it actually takes to install this kind of proactive leadership across your entire organization, not just one checklist, but a real repeatable infrastructure, head to operationlead.com to learn about our system and process. Readiness isn't a trait. It's not luck, and it's not something a person either has or doesn't. It's built deliberately before it's ever tested. Next week, I'm handing the mic to someone who lives on the other side of every decision we've been talking about on this show. Jared Renning is a machinist in Fargo, North Dakota, and he's going to tell us what it actually feels like to be led, well and not well, from the floor looking up. That's episode 31. But until then, I'm Craig Coyle, and this is the Frontline Leadership Podcast.